After the formation of the zygote, the embryonic cells duplicate, forming a morula, a solid ball of 16 or more identical cells. The morula eventually becomes a blastocyst 4 days after conception. A blastocyst is a mostly hollow ball of trophoblast cells surrounding a small cluster of cells called the embryoblast. The embryoblast will eventually become your baby. 7 days after conception, the blastocyst will attempt to implant itself into the endometrium, a thick mucosal lining that helps nourish the embryoblast. The trophoblast cells will secrete digestive enzymes that erode the endometrium, allowing the blastocyst to implant itself into the endometrium. While implantation is occurring, the blastocyst converts itself into a gastrula, from which 3 primary germ layers form, along with extra embryonic membranes. The embryoblast further divides into the upper epiblast and lower hypoblast, which together form the embryonic disc. During the first 2 to 3 weeks of development, 3 extra embryonic membranes form: the amnion, yolk sac, and allantois. The amnion is a transparent membrane sac that stems from the epiblast. The amnion surrounds the amniotic cavity, which is filled with amniotic fluid. The fluid regulates temperature and helps to protect the embryo from trauma. The yolk sac forms the primitive digestive gut and serves as the earliest source of red blood cells. From the yolk sac stems a small pocket of embryonic tissue, the allantois. The allantois forms the structural base of the umbilical cord, the embryo's link to the placenta, and ultimately becomes part of the bladder. Once implantation has successfully occurred, around 12 days after fertilization, the syncytial trophoblast, a portion of the trophoblast responsible for secreting HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, the hormone responsible for maintaining the corpus luteum, develops into a membrane known as the chorion. The chorion will sprout chorionic villi, which, in combination with the mother's endometrial tissues, the Dasidua bacillus, will form the placenta. The placenta is a temporary organ that is the site of nutrient and waste exchange between the mother and fetus. It also takes over the role of secreting HCG once fully formed, becoming an essential temporary endocrine organ. During week 3, the embryonic disc transforms into an embryo with 3 primary germ layers, the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, through a process known as gastrulation. The upper layer, the ectoderm, gives rise to the nervous system and the structures of the skin epidermis. The lowest level, the endoderm, forms the linings of the respiratory, digestive, and urogenital systems and associated glands. The middle layer, the mesoderm, gives rise to everything else.
Neurulation is the first major event in embryonic development. The nervous system is derived from the ectoderm, and it forms from a structure called the neural plate. The neural plate folds to provide the neural folds. Then the neural folds form a depression called the neural groove. When the neural folds fuse together, the neural tube is formed. The neural tube will give rise to the central nervous system. So what about the peripheral nervous system? Well, the PNS arises from the neural crest, which provides the developing embryo with nerves and ganglia. The anterior portion of the neural tube becomes the brain, and the caudal, the end, portion becomes the spinal cord. Inside of the neural tube is the neural canal from which all of the vesicles will form. All these small but major changes happen over the first 1 to 3 weeks. The neural tube develops even further into the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain, which are the primary brain vesicles by week 4 of embryonic development. Each of these structures divides even further by week 5. The forebrain, or prosencephalon, divides into the telencephalon and the diencephalon. This probably sounds like a whole bunch of nonsense, so let me break it down for you. The telencephalon will become the cerebral hemispheres of the brain, which includes the cerebral cortex, basal nuclei, and white matter. This is all important for movements, thought, and senses. The other portion of the prosencephalon, the diencephalon, will become the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, and retina. The retina? Well, yes. The eye is actually externalized brain tissue, specifically the retina. Do you see these cups? Well, this is where the eyes will form. These structures are important to relay senses and secrete hormones necessary for everyday function. The next portion, the midbrain, or the mesencephalon, will remain as the midbrain. Finally, the rhomencephalon will divide into 2 secondary brain vesicles, the metencephalon and the diencephalon. The metencephalon will become the pons and the cerebellum. The cerebellum is vital to balance and unconscious movement. The myelencephalon will become the medulla oblongata. Isn't it amazing how all these changes occur in such a small embryo? Fetal circulation is the opposite of what one would think when it comes to pumping blood to and from the fetus and the mother. It is a complicated process because the mother, the placenta, is completing the work that the fetus cannot do since its lungs are not developed. The placenta is where oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, waste, and even some drugs are exchanged. There are 2 structures that are essential to the placenta: the umbilical arteries and the umbilical vein. The 2 umbilical arteries actually carry deoxygenated blood from the fetus to the placenta, while the single umbilical vein carries oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus. There are also other structures that contribute to circulation. For instance, the ductus venosus carries blood from the umbilical vein to the inferior vena cava, and blood is able to bypass the liver capillaries. In addition, the ductus arteriosus carries blood from the pulmonary trunk to the aorta. Something that is important about the ductus arteriosus, another feature, the foramen ovale, is that they serve as shunts, permitting blood to bypass the lungs. The fetus needs these shunts because the lungs are not inflated yet. Resistance to blood flow through the lungs is high, and blood pressure is higher in the right side of the heart as opposed to the left side. Blood will flow from the right side to the left side through any available route. The foramen ovale is a flap-covered hole between the right and left atria. These adaptations are extremely important so that your developing fetus will receive the nourishment that it needs.
So 8 weeks marks the end of the embryonic period, and this is where the fetus's head is as large as its body. All the major brain regions are present. The liver is super large and is beginning to produce blood cells, and the body's limbs are present, and the toes of fingers that are once webbed are now free. Bone ossification is starting to take place, and the cardiovascular system is fully functional. Actually, all of the body systems are present at this time as well. At this time, the baby is 30 millimeters or 1.2 inches and weighs about 2 grams or 0.6 ounces. So we reach 9 to 12 weeks or about 3 months into pregnancy, and the head is still big, but the body is starting to compensate and elongate. The brain is growing bigger, and the spinal cord, cervical, and lumbar enlargements are becoming more apparent. The facial features are being more present, and the skin, epidermis, and dermis are visible. The heartbeat can be detected now from the outside, and you can start hearing it during ultrasounds. Bone formation is happening still, and bone marrow can start doing blood cell formation. Lungs are developing at the same time as well, and the fetus is bringing in and out amniotic fluid. The gender can also be determined at this time. And right now, the baby is 90 millimeters or 3.5 inches. So we reach 13 to 16 weeks of pregnancy, and this is where the fetus will show great improvement. The cerebellum will start to be more prominent, and blinking of the eyes and suckling motions of the lips occur. That's me trying to figure out how to draw lips, but then realizing I can't. So the body will start to grow bigger, more proportionate to the head, and the kidneys will also be developed. A lot of the bones and joints will also be developed as well. The baby at this time is 140 millimeters or 5.5 inches. So now we reach about 17 to 20 weeks of pregnancy, or about 5 months, and this is where the body starts to get a little bit bigger. The baby is going to be covered in vernix caseosa, which is a waxy white thick substance that covers the body. This is seen when it's like first being born. It's like covered in this jelly consistency. The purpose of this substance is to protect the baby's skin, as it is in the fluid for like 9 months. So without it, it would wrinkle, and it would just protect it. The limbs are almost done developing as well. It's definitely getting bigger, and the mom can start to feel fetal movements. The baby will be about 190 millimeters or 7.5 inches at this time. So now we reach 21 weeks to 30 weeks of pregnancy, or about 6 to 7 months. This is where a huge weight spike occurs, so a majority of the weight gain happens at this time. So the baby is definitely getting bigger. The baby's spinal cord will begin to myelinate, and distal limbs will start to ossify. Fingernails and toenails will be complete as well. The body is now fully proportioned, so we don't have a big head baby anymore. And the bone marrow will become the main site of blood cell formation, which means that the liver no longer will produce blood cells. Male babies will have their testes descend around 7 months. The baby will be about 280 millimeters or about 11 inches at this time. So we reach our final weeks of pregnancy, which is 30 to 38 weeks, or about 8 or 9 months. And the baby is pretty much almost done developing. Fat accumulates in the hypodermis, which allows the skin to thicken. So that's me thickening the skin. And it's definitely becoming fully grown. So the baby will be 360 milliliters or 14 inches and weigh 3.2 kilograms or 7 pounds.